Hello. So today's video is to help you with the process of starting on the negative space drawing in terms of making the silhouette and then how to approach filling in designs for that silhouette. So I've already gone ahead and created an outline. And this is the finished outline that I'm ready to go with my design work in the background. But I didn't just get this all in one step. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I got here in order to make it look the way that I've got it looking and the way that I intended it to look. Because sometimes it can be difficult when it comes to something complex like this owl to show the details and get everything lined up exactly like you want it if you're just trying to focus on getting the silhouette of the outline. So sometimes it helps to get some structural elements drawn in order to do that. So here is the original sketch, and in this you can see all the original loose sketch lines, and you can see the shapes that I applied for the owl in order to get the structure of the body and the head and the feet and the branches and everything all sort of lined up. And you can see that there's a lot of overlapping elements with this, and I've got a lot of interior details that ultimately won't be in the finished product. But by drawing all of those details, it helps to ensure that I get everything sort of lined up the way that it should be. And that's an important part of a good, successful drawing of these. Now, the other thing is, you're going to have to ultimately then go in and erase all of those lines that are not intended to be a part of the finished sketch. And if you draw lightly enough, well, that's pretty easy. You just go back in and erase that. But I realize that some of you may struggle with drawing lightly. That's a frequent, common problem for art students. And if you can't draw light enough, especially when you're just focusing on trying to get the details down, and you're not really so much thinking about how much pressure you're putting on the pencil, sometimes you end up putting marks in the wrong place and end up having to erase things that you want to get rid of so that they're not part of the finished product. But when you do that, sometimes those pencil marks just don't go fully away, and you end up with a whole bunch of ghost impressions of lines that you didn't intend. So there's a little trick that can make this whole process easier, and that is, don't worry about it. Just draw it at whatever pressure level you see fit, and then what you can do is trace the final image onto a brand new sheet, which is what I've done with this finished product here, in order to get it looking the way I want and only keep the lines that I want. And all of the lines that I have down here, by the way, are fully erasable. They're light enough with very minimal pressure that I'm only keeping the details that I want. So to kind of illustrate this, this is the original sketch, but you can see that I've added some black Sharpie around the outside edges. That's because I want to illustrate the parts that I want to keep and not the parts that I want to lose. And also what this does is, this makes it easier to trace the image. So all I'd have to do is just place a brand new blank sheet of paper over the top of this, and then because these Sharpie lines are so dark and bold, I should be able to see those through the paper and just trace and only trace over the lines that I want to keep, avoiding keeping things like this line here and these lines and all the sketch lines in between elements, because remember, it's just the outline, it's not the interior. Now you can see I've also kept this aspect of the eyes and the mouth. That's because I wanted to kind of have sort of a hybrid design where it's got some interior details. Plus, this is a fairly bulky shape, and so I wanted to at least have something in the inside to break that up a little bit more, just add to that whole subdivision of the space. Because it's okay for you to kind of break and bend the rules a little bit. It doesn't have to all be completely negative space or completely positive space in order to be successful. Now you may find that if your sketch paper is too thick, you won't be able to see it well, even with the dark Sharpie lines when you're trying to trace it. If that's the case, a trick that you can use is what you see here, which is you can take the original image and the new sheet of paper and line them up together and just tape them to a window. And that natural light coming in from behind makes it much easier to see the lines. So what you're seeing here is not anything that I've drawn on the paper on top. That's a blank sheet of paper. What you're seeing is the black Sharpie lines that you're able to see through as a result of the backlight coming through. This can also be achieved with expensive technology like a light board, but like I said, just taping it to a window is a perfectly acceptable way of doing this. So then what I did from there is I just simply traced this version by having this over it and just traced and kept only the lines that I wanted. So now I no longer need the original sketch, and I can set that aside, and I'm left with the nice light enough drawing for the finished product. So now I'm ready to start doing my design work in the background. So the main rule to keep in mind for a negative space drawing is what you don't want to do is what I did with this on the finished product, which is to outline everything in black Sharpie. Because when you do that, it destroys the illusion of that negative space effect that you're trying to achieve. So instead, you're going to imply those edges by how you approach putting down your Sharpie marks. So in other words, whatever design work that I do, it needs to go right to these edges. So I'm just going to start putting in a pattern here. And you can see I'm just repeating this same thing, but you notice I'm following right along the edge. And I'm not crossing this line, I'm trying to stop right at that line. And I can do any number of designs on this surface just to kind of enhance that effect. Now, one thing you gotta be careful about though, and this is just important for this type of drawing anyway, is your designs need to be very tight. Because for example, if I want to retain all of these nice sharp details around the ear and these sort of parts that stick out here, if I just do a design pattern that looks like this, well, eventually I'm going to be erasing the pencil marks. And you always want to think in terms of what's going to happen when you erase those pencil marks. And so if I look at this line here, if I erase all these pencil marks, then I'm going to lose a lot of these details because it's just too spread out. So in order to be successful with something like this, it's important that whatever design work you do goes right to this edge for one. So don't stop short. So you can see this mark right here kind of stopped a little short. So I'm going to extend that a little bit out, make sure I go all the way to the line. And two, make sure that the designs that you do are dense enough, are close enough together that regardless of what the design looks like, you should still be able to identify the original design. So now you can see that line is there. And so I'm going to pull in, I'm just going to finish out this area to really truly illustrate this effect. But the idea is that you can make out what the edge of the owl's wing and cheek, and eventually when I get up to it in the ear area up here, and it will allow those details to show through. So I have to get down into all the little corners and gaps and things and make sure that my patterns are really dense. So if I make them dense enough, if I'm successful in that way, then the good thing is I don't need those lines. And those lines are no longer necessary. So once I finish, I can erase those lines out and rely on implied lines to make these details show. And that's exactly what I want to do. And the only way I can accomplish that, again, is by making sure that anything that I fill in is nice and dense. So I'm just going to time lapse for a moment and sort of finish this area and then show you exactly what I mean. Okay, So you can see now that I filled in this design pattern in here, and notice that as I was doing this, I kept changing my designs. I didn't stick with any one particular designs. Remember that this assignment is all about rhythm and visual movement, and in order to do that, you need lots of excitement, lots of contrast, constantly changing those patterns up. So if you repeat the same thing too much over too large of an area, it starts to get a little boring. So always keep that in mind. So that's why I've done so many different things. And I didn't have any of this pre-planned. I just kind of did this on the fly. But you can, of course, reference some material on the internet, look up some of those search terms to give yourself some ideas for some patterns if you struggle with coming up with stuff like this on the fly. But the point of what I wanted to show you is what I was talking about here with the line work. You can still very clearly make out the edge of the owl, the corner of the wing and the cheek and the ear going through here because of how densely I filled in those patterns. So I feel very confident that I can actually start to erase that pencil line out from behind because I'm not going to lose any details. I'm not going to lose any information because I've made my patterns very tight in and close and right at that edge. So even without the pencil lines in there, I can still see everything, and that's going to be very critical. So as you're going around and you're filling in all your designs, always make sure you're thinking about that. Ask yourself, if I erase the pencil lines, will I still be able to make out all the details? If the answer to that question is no, then you need to fill in your patterns more densely. Go in between things and add in more stuff. So this video isn't really going to be about what patterns to use or anything like that. Like I said, you can do some looking up of things like Sharpie patterns, Zentangle, negative space drawing, Sharpie design, Sharpie graffiti, Sharpie art, and you'll get all kinds of great examples of artwork that's similar to this to kind of get you thinking about it. But one other thing that I wanted to point out in this video is while I have been doing all these patterns on the fly, sometimes you want something that's a bit more complex. And if you just try to do it on the fly, sometimes it may not turn out exactly like you intend. So it's okay to also draw out some details in pencil first. This is something I don't want you to do all the time because I want you to get in the habit of sort of figuring out this process without having to do that for a number of reasons. One, because it just looks a bit more spontaneous if you kind of do most of the work on the fly. But that said, if it's something more complex, you might want to draw a little bit of extra pencil stuff. Another reason why you don't want to do that, draw things, pre-draw them with pencil first, is because this is a very dense design with a lot of drawing materials. And if you do everything and all the design work with pencil first, and then you go back over all the design work with Sharpie markers, it's going to effectively double the amount of time you have to spend on this drawing. And so in order to save yourself time, I want you to try to do most of the drawing directly with Sharpie. But like I said, if you've got something more complex that you want to do, it might not hurt to do a little bit of pre-drawing with pencil to ensure that the details that you make look exactly like you intend before you put them down with the permanent marker. So I'm going to continue this drawing for just a little bit more, show you a little bit more time lapse just to kind of give you an idea on this. But ultimately, those are the things I wanted to share with you today, and I hope that you will take your time and do things right so that you end up with a really nice drawing in the end. And all that takes a little bit of planning, a little bit of care, and thinking very carefully about what the end product is going to look like in terms of trying to demonstrate rhythm and movement throughout your composition. Now, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some more pencil work, and I'm going to try to be careful not to go over my design, but I want to do something a little more fluid because I want to create some visual movement. This is another reason why doing a little pre-planning with pencil can help, because you can kind of plan out what things are going to be where. So I'm just trying to break up this space of the background a little bit with some line work that I will go over with Sharpie, but I wanted to sort of pre-draw it in so I kind of get a feel for what that's going to look like. And I want this to end up being sort of like a vine for this flower. But by drawing it first with pencil, then I can ensure that it ends up exactly where I intend it, and I don't have to think about it too much as I'm going over the outlines. Now, one other very important thing, and you'll see me get to this in a few moments whenever I start, whenever I finish this outlining part here, is that it's important to remember that pencil is not a part of the finished product. So all of this pencil line work that I'm doing right now, and anything that's underneath this flower and the entire outline of the owl itself, will need to be erased completely out of the finished product. Sometimes students forget to do that step, and that will affect your craftsmanship grade. So it's important that when you get a drawing done like this, the last step in the process is to get your eraser out and go over the entire drawing and erase any pencil lines that are still visible in the end result. Some of them you may, of course, be effectively covering up, and in which case you probably don't have to worry about it too much. But you're going to sometimes miss things, and small little details with the pencil will still show through. So always remember, get rid of those pencil lines before you declare your drawing finished. Now, another important point that I want to make is that you should be doing the majority of your design with the ultra fine point Sharpie. You should only use fine point, just like when we did the balance design. You should only use the fine point marker whenever you're filling in shapes that you've already outlined with the ultra fine. That's because the fine point tends to have a bit more of a softer, fuzzier appearance when you put it on paper, and it just doesn't look quite as good if you use it by itself. But it can be very time consuming to fill in the inside of shapes with a ultra fine point Sharpie. So if you want to switch back and forth between them, so whenever you're filling in the interiors of shapes like this, you can use your fine point. Just make sure that you outline everything with ultra fine first.